everyone, welcome to my channel. Now that we are officially in the fall season and summer is behind us, I'm going to go over my best and worst books that I read this past summer. I'll be starting with the best in an order of kind of the least favorite of the best to the very, very best, if that makes sense. And then going into the worst books of the summer, starting with the least worst to the worst. I don't know if that made any sense. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. The first book I want to talk about that was the least best, but still amazing, was Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. I loved this book. This was actually featured in one of my recent reads reviews videos that I will link down below if you want to see me talk more about it. In short, this is an adult romance that is a lot more smutty and steamy than the adorable cover would suggest. So if you prefer your adult romances with a friends to lovers trope, a fake dating trope, and some pretty steamy scenes, then I would highly recommend Fix Her Up. It's definitely my favorite romance of the year so far. Next favorite that I have to talk about is This Is How It Always Is by Lori Frankel. Again, this was featured in one of my previous videos, so if you want to see more thoughts about it, I'll link that down below. But basically, this is a family drama. It's adult contemporary. It has transgender representation in here, and it is such a wonderful story. I highly recommend this to any and everyone, all ages. It's so good. It follows a family who has a son, the youngest of their 4 sons, I believe, who realizes very early on that he identifies more as a girl than as a boy. And it's just about this family dealing with that in society today. And it's the sweetest thing. The characters are incredible. I couldn't get enough. It was so good. So I highly recommend this one if you haven't read it already. The next book I have to talk about is The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. Oh my god, this book made me cry more than any book this year, at least for sure, and maybe more than any book ever. The dog on the cover is not misleading. This is about a dog. This story is all told from this dog's perspective. It's an adult contemporary, it's a family drama, but the fact that we have the dog's perspective makes it so incredibly unique. And yeah, if you if you like dogs and stories that revolve around dogs, then I highly recommend this one. Just be prepared to have some tissues nearby, especially at the end. It is definitely heart-wrenching, so just prepare yourself, but I highly recommend it. It is so, so good. The second to most favorite book that I have on the list is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Oh my gosh, this almost won top spot. It was so close. This is such a great high fantasy story. We get classic Brandon Sanderson writing here, where we have incredible magic systems that are very well explained, have limitations, just are so fascinating to read about. We've got great characters, and I love to see the presence of even more female characters in his story. I just adored this book and this story and these characters so much. This right now is a standalone. I really hope we get a sequel soon. There are definitely rumors out there that a sequel is in the works, so let's cross our fingers that that happens. And if you haven't read any Brandon Sanderson before, I know most people will probably recommend Mistborn and that trilogy as a starting place for him. I actually would almost recommend Warbreaker more, because you don't have to commit to a full series or trilogy. This is standalone as it stands right now, so it's much more it's much less intimidating to get started with Brandon Sanderson. I absolutely loved this book. 5 out of 5 stars. I can't wait for the sequel. And my favorite book of the past season, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Oh my goodness. I did talk about this book a little bit more in a previous video, so of course I'll link that down below. All the links will be below in the description box. But Where the Crawdads Sing follows our main character, Kaya, who grows up alone and abandoned in the deep South. She grows up in these marshlands in South Carolina at a very treacherous time in history, where there was just a lot of prejudice, and she kind of is labeled as this marsh girl who's just an outcast, is very ignored. But then later on in her life, there's a murder that happens in the marshlands, and she's instantly blamed because she's been this outcast. So this story is half coming of age, and I think it is predominantly about Kaya and her story of growing up, but it also has this murder mystery and court trial, the second half of the book, that keeps you on the edge of your seat the whole time. I could not put this book down when I got to the trial. I had to know what happened because you become so invested in Kaya's story. She's just the best character. I love her to pieces. And so if you haven't read Where the Crawdads Sing, I'm sure you've heard a lot about it. Please pick it up. It is so good and I highly recommend. Those were my top 5 books that I read the past summer. Let's get into the worst books that I read this summer. Great, the least worst book that I read this summer was The Last Anniversary by Liane Moriarty. I did end up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars, so it wasn't terrible by any means. Liane Moriarty probably sounds familiar. She's the author of Big Little Lies, What Alice Forgot, My Husband's Secret, all of which are excellent stories. I loved all of her books that I've read before, and I'm trying to read the rest of her books, some of her older ones, and The Last Anniversary is one of her first, if not her first, I don't think it's her first, but it's one of her first books. And you can kind of tell it's not the greatest. I didn't love it. It was very mediocre. There were a lot of characters that just kind of fell by the wayside. It was a kind of strange plot. I just, very forgettable. So if you do want to read Liane Moriarty, read any of her other books first before reading The Last Anniversary, because this one's just very forgettable. The next book I have to talk about is When Breath Becomes Air. This one was a memoir written by a neurosurgeon who was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer when he was in his mid-30s, and wrote this memoir as he was kind of fighting that cancer and dying. I went into this book expecting it to be more geared towards like a self-help kind of book where we get some kind of wisdom passed on to us from him, and it wasn't quite that. It was definitely more just focusing on his story about going through med school, meeting the love of his life, getting married, trying to have a kid. Like, it was very much more about his life, and towards the very end, we do get a couple of nuggets of wisdom, but that is not the primary focus of the book. The primary focus of the book is really just his life. There's nothing wrong with that. It was actually quite good, and I still rated it 3 out of 5 stars. I think it was just my expectations were so different about what I wanted from this book, and it really didn't impact me in the way I thought it would. I didn't connect to it much at all, so it just didn't quite live up to what I thought it was going to be, and therefore I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I would not recommend this. I would definitely recommend it to folks who think it sounds interesting, but just go in with the assumptions that you're not going to necessarily gain a lot of like insight about the meaning of life and all of that from this book. It's just more about this really fascinating man's life and his story, and kind of the few nuggets of knowledge and wisdom that he gained through his life. So when both comes here, I'm sorry that I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. Next book I have to talk about is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. There is nothing that bad about this book. It was 3 out of 5 stars once again. Very mediocre for me. And I think that I went into this book with the assumption that it would be a Mulan Project Runway crossover, because that's what it's pitched as, which sounded so intriguing to me. That is about 10% of the book. The 90% of this book is primarily focused on a teen romance, which I am no longer interested in reading at all. So it's not that it was done bad, it's just not what I wanted to read about. I wanted to read a Mulan retelling with some Project Runway elements, and I only got that for 10% of this book. I have a full review on this if you want to watch it. Bottom line, mediocre, felt like every other young adult fantasy without much difference and unique elements to it. So therefore, 3 out of 5 stars, just a very average read. Probably never going to pick it up again. Probably not going to read the sequel. Sorry. The second to last worst book of the summer is Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This whole series was so mediocre. Once again, it's another case of young adult fantasy straying away from fantasy into more of a romance story, where we get 10 to 20% of the plot being about fantasy elements and an adventure and trying to have our characters do something and the other 80 to 90% of it is romance, and I just am so over it. I don't want it anymore. So no more romance in my young adult fantasies. I'm done. I'm not reading it anymore. So this is probably Legendarium finale. We're probably some of the last books that I'll ever read that have romance in the young adult fantasy category, because I'm just not interested in angsty teen romances anymore, being a plot device in a story, because most of the time it comes off as just extremely immature. The characters are fighting about things just to kind of create conflict and drama, even though it's most of the time like, oh, we just didn't communicate, or we just didn't tell each other something that was on our minds. I'm just over it. I'm over it. So, and it's, again, Legendary itself is not bad. It is good. Nah, it's not good. It's mediocre. It's average. But I don't like Stephanie Garber's writing style either, which is why it is right below Spin the Dawn. It is filled with weird metaphors that take you out of the story completely. Like, I don't want to smell heartbreak, and I don't want to taste the moon. That doesn't even make sense. So I just didn't like it. I just didn't like it. So this is definitely one of the least favorite books that I read this past summer. I'm sorry to any fans of the Caraval series out there. The worst book. So all the rest of these books that I've talked about were 3 out of 5 stars. They were all just like mediocre. I didn't hate them. I didn't love them. They're just okay. This one I really didn't like. I really didn't like it. I won't say hate, that is an extremely strong word, but I really didn't like this one, and I'm not even sorry for it at all. And that is going to be Shatter Me by Tahara Mafi. Oh my god. I have a full rant review that I'll link down below if you want to check that out to see me just go off on this book, because I really don't like it. So where do we start? Characters were whiny and stupid. The writing style was obnoxious. I really didn't like it. The plot was non-existent. It had no plot. Yeah, so, like, I can't really say anything good about this book. Yeah, I'll not be continuing with this series, so I really, if you like Shatter Me, then good for you. We just have differing opinions, and that is completely okay. You can absolutely love Shatter Me, and we can still be friends, but I just really don't like this. Yeah, this is definitely the worst book of the summer, so. Is anyone else with me out there? I really would love to know if anyone else has read Shatter Me and feels similar. Leave some comments down below. If you love it, that's great too. Leave some comments down below if you love it. But I really am curious if I'm the only one here that really didn't like Shatter Me, because it is so hyped and so beloved by so many people. So maybe I'm just missing something. I don't know. And that's all I've got for you today. Those were my top 5 best books of the summer and top 5 worst books of the summer. What were some of yours? What were some of your favorites and your least favorites this past summer? I'd love to know, so leave some comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Sometimes even more videos if I have some reviews to release. Thank you so much for watching today, and until next time, bye!